Hi, I'm Pietro Pozzinelli of Open Lab Games, and this video I'm going to talk about Football Drama, which is a game we released about 6 months ago, and about our experience and some things we believe, some mistakes we did, and some things we believe we have done right. And so we hope that it may be useful for other people who do indie narrative games. Okay, so Football Drama is a game available on desktops and through Steam and itch, and on mobile on both Apple and Android devices. It was released on September 18th, 2019, and it's still on sale, of course. So, first of all, about narrative sport games. So, Football Drama is a particular kind of game because usually sports games are sort of either emulators or managerial games. But I was curious about the topic of sports storytelling because in other media it's actually a quite mature field. There are lots of books and movies about sports and telling nice, interesting stories about sports, but not so much in video games. And we know that narrative games and indie narrative games in recent years have shown that it's possible to create interesting and also commercially viable games about non-trivial, non-pure entertainment, not just silly topics. And of course, this happens in any maturing media. And it's happening in video games too. So these examples, they give me the sort of courage to attempt this with sports game, in particular about games about football. Now, there have been, given the fact that undoubtedly, whether you like it or not, the narrative components in games is becoming more and more prominent and relevant and interesting. Also in games like FIFA, they try to create a narrative component, but the results, of course, writing stories with such strict corporate boundaries and the fact you cannot touch any interesting topic about the field makes it very problematic for the poor writers. We of course didn't have these constraints, and so we could develop a story which touches a lots of themes and about corruption and problematic life stories, and so this is what we did. And also our theme has been involved like sort of anthropological view of sports as a social and cultural phenomenon. Okay, and so some things that I believe we did wrong in developing and releasing Football Drama. So first of all, big mistake we did comes from the fact that we come from applied games. So we did 7 years of development in creating games for museum research centers and so on, and we did a lot of mobile development, also web development for mobile games on the web. So we acquired some habits which when we started developing Football Drama, we started from the mobile version. And I know this is bizarre, but that's what we did. And when we considered having a desktop version, we didn't have the resources to develop a version from scratch. So we just adapted what we had for mobile, and not as much. The problem has been there, not as much the fact that the user interface is in portrait mode, but the fact that that the mechanics are and the timing of the game is for short usages, with a extremely simplified user interface for mobile. So this makes happy some mobile users, but not so much the desktop ones. And in fact, so I encourage you, if you want to go multi-platform, which is probably a wise idea in the context of this indie apocalypse, is to start from desktop and then eventually derive a mobile version instead of doing it the other way around. And okay, so this was this point. Another obvious mistake, it's obvious probably for experienced commercial game designers, was that we hard-coded the controls inside the UI, which allowed us to do a lot of very refined things and make it very usable on mobile. But then when you want to plug a controller or things like this, adapting it may be quite problematic. So I would start from the very beginning, having mediating the input from different kinds of devices, and also be aware that mobile, once you move from mouse to touch, is much harder to make it safe, and because with touch you can do really wild kind of usages and multi-touch. And also you have lots of variations across devices from Android and iOS on behavior. So while I think it's wisest to start from the desktop, don't assume that if you have solved the input problems on the desktop, you have solved it in mobile. That's not the case. And another habit which comes from the UI design for mobile is that we had an extremely simplified way of controlling the game, which on desktop for many players wasn't satisfactory enough. They felt they weren't controlling the game. So this was a mistake in the sense you should probably adapt the level of control or make some adaptations when you're moving from one platform to the other. And this is basically it. Also, of course, all this, in our case at least, it was there were a lot of constraints due to having or not having funding to do further developments. So another thing where the player complained was that the narrative was narrative branching and tree was there weren't enough branches in the narrative. This because this is strictly related to the fact that we had to release the game before the full narrative story was implemented because of lack of funding. So basically we have the story with a long branch, which happens if you take some risks and some compromises in your life as a coach and its relationship with bizarre individuals surrounding you. But if you absolutely avoid any contact with shady guys, then the narrative can be a bit frustrating because there are not enough events and choices. Still, there is a huge amount of work done in the game. This is, for example, just the press release meeting graph, and but still, it wasn't sufficient for all. This is a bizarre point, but it's the fact that you shouldn't release the game until it's really ready. What do I mean by this? Is the fact that the standards today for an indie game, for a commercial indie game, are very high, and so if the game design in particular and the mechanics are not satisfactory for a large share of users, it's probably better to think and to work on them a bit more before releasing. Another problem with the game is the fact that it's football themed. So in a way, this was good and is good because you reach a large audience, and in a way you also give staff, journalists, and curators, a way to feature the game. Okay, so I mean, it's a different game on football, and this has made the news, and it's been like featured by Apple worldwide several times because of this. But on the other side, the game talks about the world surrounding football and the Premier League and the Champions League, and some events and FIFA and corruption things, and there's a lot of jokes and reference about that in the game. But so you don't know, if you don't know anything about this, you don't know anything about like the British supporters chanting funny stuff during games, things like this, you will miss the references, so the game may not be interesting for you. And so be aware of the kind of audience your narrative is talking to when you decide the theme, the narrative theme, the story, the core theme of your game. Then what we think, we believe we did right. Well, I think one thing that has worked for us is to loop on the prototype, present it at events, people, and somehow get the feedback in a specific sense, which I will talk about later, and looping that. I think that's how we improve the game playability, believe it or not, enormously during development. So don't think that you're bringing it at the event in order to acquire audience. That absolutely does not work. But you get contacts in the industry, you get to know journalists, but most of all, what's most precious is you show it around and you get feedback about what's working or not working. And yes. Now, I want to talk a bit about how to consider and evaluate the feedback that you get, because so I don't think that the feedback, I call it incompetent feedback from players that they tell you when you're there, or even better, when you're watching it, they don't know it, which is way better, of course, because otherwise you're altering, changing what they're going to tell you. But what they tell you is not that important, because often they suggest things from games that they already know, so they will frustrate the idea of innovation or things like this. But watching them play, that's very useful. And so in particular when your game does not have any good game feel yet, or any graphical aspects, maybe that's not so useful to show it, because most of the players will miss that some things which may look boring are not actually working very well. But once you have some level of graphic refinement and game feel, then watching them play, because you will always find that things that are obvious for you, they're not actually obvious at all for the users, and things that you find are secondary, very important for them, and they will play with much more attention and much more slowly and carefully with respect to how you do it, and so on. And this has not been a single time that we brought an event and we didn't come back with a ton of ideas and revisions and fixes to do in the game. So do that. Another thing which I realized when I started to create the new game Roller Drama is a way in which I build games, and it's not how often games are built or how it is taught to build games, is that I don't build games around the mechanics, but I build games around the story. Though the games, both games, Football Drama, Roller Drama, the mechanic, the game, the matches, and how you manage them are extremely important. But still, what leads the development from beginning to end is how, through the mechanics and through the dialogue, how you express the story, the characters, and the life changes. And so I suggest you that it's possible to develop a game where mechanics are very important by centering it on the story and the characters, and this is something that will not change that much, and it will be something you can focus on. And instead, the mechanics are dependent on that, and not the other way around. And this seems to me quite a good method to develop games. And of course, and even the very term of definition of depth, and I think that because like in football and in roller derby, and the girls and guys playing these sports, they have lots of very interesting stories, and somehow making the game as a medium to approach these stories gives the player a feeling of depth. So the depth does not come necessarily from the complexity of the combinatorial space of the game, but it can come from the depth of the story. And if you put these two things together, I think you can get very interesting results. Then what we'll do different in the new game, which is still a sports storytelling game, roller drama, based on roller derby instead of after football drama. Well, of course, so we'll follow my advice of going from desktop to the other platforms. Of course, like football drama will be multi-language. So multi-language, multi-platform is good because it allows you to reach different markets and to be open if you get a publisher deal to publish on different platforms. So I think this is the right way to go. And also in the new setting, it will not just be a linear branching narrative like it was in football drama, which is still called technically a generative narrative, but it's completely scripted. It will be scripted too, but instead of having linear branching model, I want it to be more quest based, so that also you partially dealing with the problem of replayability, and I think it can be more interesting for players. Of course, it requires more effort, but if you want to know all about the distinctions and different styles of narrative, there's this beautiful book, Procedural Storytelling Game Design, which I advise you to read because there are lots of things you can learn from there. And another thing we want to somehow, football drama was dialogue focused and was not much exploring of the environment and of the world surrounding the characters. It was all indirectly defined by the story, but here we want to show more and to let you explore more the world surrounding the girls' team and all their stories. And so even more, like in football drama, we have this comics layouts which inspired us, but we are moving more the camera also for the narrative. We have real-time matches instead of turn-based. We have much more integration between story environments and an interactive text logs and the mental models of the girls and so on. So that's how we evolved from football drama to the new game, and I hope you. Of course, we will do many more mistakes, but new ones. So I hope that maybe you can avoid some that we did in the past. Thank you. See you soon. Bye.